I always had a curious mind, but was never fully a believer. Maybe that's why I've always been fascinated by the unknown. I suppose I was chasing something to believe, something outside of this boring and basic reality. Little did I know this boring basic reality is eons better than what might be lurking behind the curtain. This is the story of me unraveling that curtain. I was raised in Canada and grew up in the city of Mississauga since the age of 11. I was born in the city of Multan in Pakistan. I have minimal memories of my time there, but whatever I carry, it's a luxury. My family lived in Multan for centuries, and they have always been one of the most prestigious and well-off families of the country with endless land, businesses, and properties. A few years ago, my grandfather passed away and my dad needed to travel back to Pakistan to settle some of his unfinished affairs. One of the tasks on the list was to sell the old ruins owned by our ancestors. They were these old manors and homes built hundreds of years ago, just standing there for no reason. Government had offered us good money to sell them those ruins so they can demolish them and build some roads or malls. I am not really sure. I had never been back to Pakistan since I moved. I was very intrigued to travel back with him. We landed at Multan International Airport around 2 a.m. It was a heavily connected long flight. A family member picked us up and drove us to his place. He was my dad's cousin. I met his kids, my second cousins. I had no clue they existed, but somehow we got along instantly. Sarah, one of my second cousin and around my age, offered to show me around the city next day. I took her up on the offer and immediately asked her to show me the family ruins. She stared at me for a second and reluctantly agreed. Turns out those ruins were simply a 45-minute drive away. Next morning, I had barely slept due to jet lag. My dad with his cousin went about his business and Sarah took me to see those ruins. We got there around 11 a.m. and it was breathtaking. I saw a building that looked like a very old, crippled manor. Behind it was a one-story house barely standing its ground, but oddly in a better shape than I'd imagined. Sarah told me that these buildings came to be around 1800s. I had never seen anything like this before, so naturally I started to explore. I walked around the manor and I could sense the energies of the ones before me. There was a calmness to it. Later I walked near the one-story house behind the manor, and for some reason it did not radiate the same vibe. I felt something dark as I walked closer. It felt like someone was staring back at me from within. So I simply stood at a distance, took some pictures of it, and decided to walk back into the old manor and explore it further. Sarah and I walked back into the manor, and I noticed something that I hadn't noticed before. Behind a wall there were stairs leading up. I asked her to walk up with me. She denied and told me how fragile they are. It could be a risk, as it could all come crumbling down. I argued that something built so long ago, still standing, won't go down by two average-sized humans. She agreed and we made our way upstairs carefully. The stairs were crooked and the walls had uninterrupted spider web all over. It was clear no one had come up here in years, decades in fact. I got to a hallway that led to different rooms. I was full of adrenaline. I walked straight down the hallway into a room at the far end. There was no door. I entered and found it to be decent sized. Walked around and saw a window. I could see that one-story house from there, still staring back at me. I walked away and found an area that would have been a walk-in closet or a really big bathroom. There was some old broken furniture squished in that room. I instinctively began to touch all of it, observe it, hold it, and tried to understand their origin. Sarah joined too. She was equally fascinated. A bit later, I observed a metal storage box. It must have been 3 by 3. I tried to open it, but it was locked. We each grabbed a leg of old broken chairs and began to smash the lock. It took a minute, but we were in. It was amazing. We found old hats and turbans, some combs, dried up ink bottles along with similar items. I took my time exploring everything. Eventually, I ended up finding an envelope. I opened it. There was a letter inside. The papers were very fragile, so me and Sarah decided to unfold the papers with immense care. The writing was still visible. The only issue was it was written in very posh Urdu. Sarah was able to tell that this letter was dated 1870, and whoever wrote it never sent it to the person it was intended for. Someone wrote it and simply kept it. That blew my mind. Why would someone write such a long letter to someone and decide not to send it? I obviously can't read a word of Urdu, and Sarah could barely make sense of it due to how ancient the vocabulary was. We decided to wrap up and leave. It felt like we'd found what we were supposed to. Carefully made our way down the stairs and drove back to her home. It took us 3 days to translate the letter in English, required a lot of assistance. And this is what was written in it. November 27th, 1870, Sunday. Uncle Bashir, peace be upon you. I am sorry I have not written to you in months. You have always been in my thoughts and my prayers. A lot has happened since my last letter sent to you. I have been lost and confused. My relationship with reality has been compromised, and I did not know how to share my experience. As you remember, I got married last year. You met my wife and gave us your blessings. I never told you the full story of how I met her. Well, today I will not only tell you how I met Aisha, my wife, but also what transpired in the last 1 year of my marriage. As you know, I picked up hunting as a hobby as a teenager, and as life turned out, I sort of made a career out of it. Few weeks before my wedding with Aisha, Colonel Albert ordered me to travel to the mountains at a hill station known as Marie. The wolves had gone savage in a local forest. They were destroying the crops, plantations, and attacking people residing in the nearby villages. My job was to eliminate as many wolves as I could with a team of young hunters. It took me days to reach, and we stayed in one of the small villages nearby the forest. I chose that village as it provided us with a cleaner view of where the wolves were usually spotted. The locals provided us with a cottage to stay and served us dinner. We planned to sleep for the night and get to work at dawn. It was around 10 p.m. and the eye could already hear the wolves howling, as if they knew I was here and why I was here. We woke up a bit later than we had anticipated, packed food and supplies for the way, checked our weapons and sharpened our daggers. It was 5 of us. We got on our horses and began our journey. Right away, I could tell the number of wolves is in the higher 20s. We managed to track a few dens and killed about 12 wolves by noon. Later, we found a safe spot to have lunch and strategize rest of the day. By evening, we managed to find and kill another 3. The sun was setting, and we decided to pack up and head back for the night. Unfortunately, we lost track of our whereabouts, and I did not want to risk heading into wolves. Therefore, we decided to camp in the forest for the night. Once the camps were set, 3 slept at a time for 3 hours and the other 2 guarded the camps. It must be around 3:30 a.m., and it was my shift to guard the tents along with 1 other hunter. I had my gun ready to go with a dagger sheath on my waist. I and the other hunter were carefully monitoring our region and making sure we don't hear a howl. No howl was heard. What we heard was a cry for help. It sounded like a woman in distress. It came from a few meters away. I told the other hunter to stand guard as I grabbed my torch and followed the woman's cry. It took me a few minutes, but I finally reached a small hill and could see a woman surrounded by 2 wolves. She had a small knife to defend and was flailing it at the wolves. She didn't have long. I stabbed the torch in the ground, quickly got into aiming position and took a shot at one of the wolves. I got him right in the head and he dropped dead. The other one ran off. I rushed to the girl. She was terrified. "How did you get here, lady? Do you know how dangerous this place is?" I asked. She told me she lived around the forest in another small village. Sadly, she lost her family due to these wolves a few weeks ago. And since then, she is trying to escape her village and trying to travel through the forest to the city side. I guided her back to my camp where she took refuge for the night and promised to get her to safety at dawn.
She was Aisha.
We managed to get through the night and left for the village at dawn. We reached around 8 a.m. All this time, I had not noticed Aisha for her appearance until we reached. I helped her off the horse and I saw her properly for the first time. Calling her beautiful would have been an understatement. She was mesmerizing. I had not felt such captivation. Considering her situation and circumstances, I did not beat around the bush and asked her to marry me and come back to the city of Multan with me. She asked me for a day to think about it. I used that time to return to the forest and hunt remaining wolves. By the time I returned, she had said yes. The villagers were grateful, and they thanked me by organizing a modest wedding for me and Aisha. We spent the night at the village and began our journey back to Multan the next day. Once we arrived, I introduced her to my family. They were taken aback by my abrupt decision, but understood why I needed to do this and what she meant to me in such a short time. There was a small 3-bedroom house behind our main building. I decided to move there with Aisha. We were about to begin our new life. I was happy, excited, and felt blessed to have found such a wonderful woman. Few weeks passed by, and everything was no less than a good dream, until one evening I noticed something. Aisha did not like having servants around. She loved doing the house chores herself. I did find it odd, but didn't question her much. After all, we were still getting to know each other. On this evening, I returned home from my daily rounds of my land and realized she had rearranged the whole place all by herself. She had moved sofas, beds, and considerably heavy furniture from one end to another, all by herself. I was shocked, a tiny girl with so much strength. I was a hunter and dealt with horror all my life, but I could never achieve that. I asked her, "How did you do that?" And she responded,
"I am from the mountains. We are built differently."
I laughed it off. One day, I was looking for my ink bottle and couldn't find it. I began to look for it in her side of things on the dressing table. I came across a tiny box. It was a little metal box and locked heavily, as if someone really didn't want it to be opened. I had never seen a box like this before. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to unlock it. I was working on it for a bit, to no avail. That is when I noticed a presence beside me. I stopped and looked abruptly. It was Aisha, looking at me as if I had committed a horrid crime. She looked angry, and for a minute I did not see Aisha behind those eyes. It was someone else. I asked her about the box, and before I could finish my question, she growled at me to put it back. I immediately did, and instantly she was Aisha again. She said, "My mom gave me this box as a gift. It's very personal to me, and I don't want you to touch it." I found that very odd, but abided for the moment. However, this moment did not register well with me. Few days went by, and everything felt normal. One day I returned home a bit early and did not find Aisha at her usual spot, which would be the kitchen or the living room. I didn't make anything of it and went to our room. As I entered, I saw this hunchback woman with gray hair sitting on our bed, reciting something. I froze. My mind ran through 100 explanations, but it did not make sense why an old lady is sitting on my bed. I called her out. "Woman, who are you? What are you doing here?" She turned back to look at me, and I swear, I don't think she had a face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a hollow outline of a face. I slammed the door and tried to get away from it. I stumbled and fell. I turned to look, and it was Aisha coming out of that room. I was so relieved but equally scared. I asked her, "Who is that woman? Why is she here?" She helped me up and asked me, "What woman, dear? It was just me. I saw you come in, and then you slammed the door." I argued that I saw an older woman without a face, but she convinced me about how nonsense that sounds, and I probably made a mistake. I tried to let it go, but that was impossible. Since that evening, I started to keep an eye on her. I started to stay home more so than ever just to forget that incident. I sensed she didn't like that. One night, it was around 10 p.m., And I was on my bed trying to sleep, and she was sitting by my side, massaging my shoulder. We had dimmed the lanterns. I could see her, but barely. It was silence. We weren't talking. At one point, I felt thirsty, and the water mug was about 15, 20 feet away from our bed. I asked her, "Love, can you get me some water?" She nodded. My eyes were on the water mug, and to her, they probably appeared to be shut. I noticed two hands appeared closer to the mug. They grabbed it and poured water in the glass nearby. I found that strange, as Aisha was still beside me, and we had no servants. I turned my neck to look at Aisha, and that's when I realized what had happened. They were her hands. She had somehow extended her arms all the way from our bed to a table that was 15, 20 feet away. I saw her stretched arms as she descended them to normal size and tried to hand me the glass of water. I was terrified. She looked at me and said,
You saw that, didn't you?
I didn't move a muscle. She proceeded to say in a voice I did not recognize,
You were not supposed to witness that.
"What are you?" I asked in a trembling voice. She didn't answer. She walked away and began to brighten all the lanterns around the room while humming a tune I never heard before. I asked again, louder this time, "What are you?" She said,
I am tired, so very tired. I thought I could carry on with this, but I am so very tired.
Tired of what I asked. As I asked her that, she turned into something different. She was that hunchback old woman with no face, gray hair, tall as the ceiling with long limbs.
This is who I am. This is who you've been living with, eating with, and sleeping with.
She growled and continued to say,
I am tired of pretending to be a puny human.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Something in me kicked in. I jumped off the bed and ran for the door. I saw her chase me manically.
You love me, remember?
She screamed. I turned back and screamed, "No, I don't love you. You are nothing but monster. You are a jinn, a trickster, and I want you to get out of my house." She stopped, looked at me with anger, and vanished before my eyes. I fell to my knees, out of breath, not able to process what had just happened. For some reason, that is when I thought of the box. She didn't let me open all those weeks ago. I rushed back in the room, looked for it. It took me a while, but I did get my hands on it. I got my hammer and shattered it. Uncle, I can't write the contents of that box. What was in it should have remained in it. It needed to be burnt. It really needed to be burned. I took it outside and shattered a lantern on top of it. It lit up and burned to ashes. I made sure it burnt to ashes. Few days went by. I sealed that house shut and moved back to our main building with my parents. I prayed every day to never see her again. Part of me wished it was all a bad dream, and Aisha, who I married, would return to me. But that never happened. Sometimes I look at that house from my room and think of her, our memories and time I spent with her. I still sense her energy radiating from that house as if she is still there, waiting for me. I hope you can understand my situation, Uncle, and keep me in your prayers. I hope to see you soon. Love, Ahmad Shah. I can't count how many times I've read this letter, and each time I discover a new horror. Someone found love in a monster all those years ago. I am still not sure if that jinn meant him harm or was genuinely in love with him. I guess we'd never know. Regardless, I can't imagine his heartbreak and the horror of that one-story house he lived in. That building radiates terror to this day. Maybe he was right. Maybe his Aisha is still trapped inside, waiting for him.